Hi everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. One of the most interesting questions surrounding the recent US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding isn't actually about Iran. It's about Marco Rubio. For months, Americans have watched the Trump administration move from military confrontation with Iran toward what now appears to be a negotiated diplomatic framework. The war dominated headlines. Military strikes dominated the news cycle. Debates over escalation, oil prices, and the future of the Middle East filled television screens. And yet, during one of the most significant foreign policy developments of the year, many people started asking a surprisingly simple question. Where is the Secretary of State? Normally, this would be Marco Rubio's moment. He's America's top diplomat. He's one of the administration's most recognizable foreign policy figures. He's spent years building a reputation as one of Washington's most hawkish voices on national security issues. So why does it feel like he's barely visible? Why are Vice President J.D. Vance, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and other administration figures receiving more attention than the man who is technically responsible for American diplomacy? Some observers see this as evidence that Rubio is being sidelined. Others believe he has lost influence inside the administration. But I think there may be a more interesting explanation. What we're seeing may not be a conflict between Trump and Rubio at all. It may actually be a rare example of perfect political alignment. In other words, Trump's White House may want Rubio in the background, and Rubio may be perfectly happy staying there. To understand why, we need to look at the situation from both sides. First, let's talk about Donald Trump. One thing we've learned about Trump over the years is that he likes to personally own major political victories. Whether we're talking about trade negotiations, peace deals, immigration policy, or foreign affairs, Trump's political brand has always centered around the idea that he alone can make the deal. If a historic breakthrough happens, Trump wants voters to associate that breakthrough with Trump. That's not unusual. Most presidents want credit for major accomplishments. But Trump has always taken this instinct further than most politicians. And that matters because the administration's approach to Iran appears to have undergone a dramatic shift. Just weeks ago, the public conversation was centered around military pressure. Now the conversation is centered around negotiations, sanctions relief, economic incentives, and diplomatic engagement. Whether you support that shift or oppose it, the political messaging requirements are very different. When an administration is emphasizing military pressure, a figure like Rubio is extremely useful. His reputation as a hardliner reinforces the message. But when an administration transitions into a negotiation phase, different messengers become more valuable. That's where figures like J.D. Vance come in. Vance has increasingly positioned himself as a representative of the more restrained, nationalist wing of the Republican coalition. He can sell diplomacy to parts of the MAGA movement that might be skeptical of endless military involvement overseas. More importantly, he can present negotiations not as weakness, but as a deal achieved through strength. From a White House perspective, having Vance become one of the public faces of the agreement may simply make more political sense. And there's another reason Rubio's lower profile could be useful for the administration. The memorandum itself is controversial. Critics on the left argue that the administration could have pursued diplomacy earlier and avoided months of conflict. Critics on the right argue that the United States is offering concessions to a regime they consider fundamentally untrustworthy. In other words, this isn't a universally popular agreement. It's politically risky. If Rubio became the administration's primary salesman for the deal, he would immediately become a target for criticism from multiple directions. Some conservatives would accuse him of abandoning his hawkish principles. Some Democrats would accuse him of helping create the crisis in the first place. From the White House's perspective, there may be little advantage in putting Rubio directly into that line of fire. But here's where things get even more interesting. Because even if Trump never explicitly told Rubio to stay in the background, Rubio may have every incentive to make the exact same decision on his own. Marco Rubio didn't arrive in Washington yesterday. He's been a senator. He's run for president. He's survived multiple political eras. And one thing experienced politicians understand better than anyone else is timing. They know when to claim credit. And they know when to avoid becoming the face of a controversial project. Think about Rubio's position right now. The memorandum is not a final peace treaty. It is not a comprehensive settlement. It is not the end of the story. It's a framework, a starting point, a temporary arrangement that opens the door for future negotiations. The most difficult issues remain unresolved. Questions about nuclear enrichment, questions about verification, questions about sanctions, questions about regional security arrangements. Those battles still lie ahead, and nobody knows whether those negotiations will succeed. That uncertainty creates political risk, a lot of political risk. Now imagine you're Marco Rubio. If you enthusiastically champion the agreement every day on television, what happens if the negotiations collapse 2 months from now? What happens if Iran walks away? What happens if domestic opposition explodes? What happens if the agreement becomes politically toxic? Suddenly, you're attached to the failure. You've invested your political capital in something you don't fully control. Experienced politicians generally try to avoid situations like that. Instead, Rubio appears to be occupying a much safer position. He's part of the administration. He's supporting the administration. But he's not necessarily becoming the public face of every controversial detail. That's a very different role. And frankly, it's a smart one. There's another factor that often gets overlooked. Many people describe Rubio simply as a hawk, and it's true that he's built a reputation as one of the Republican Party's strongest national security voices. But reducing Rubio to a single label misses something important. Above all else, Rubio is a survivor. His career demonstrates an extraordinary ability to adapt to changing political realities while preserving his relevance. He's not just ideological, he's strategic. That distinction matters, because Rubio understands that his political future extends beyond this particular agreement. He understands that today's headlines won't determine everything. The Republican Party will eventually enter a post-Trump era. Whether that happens in 4 years or 8 years, future leadership battles are coming. Future presidential primaries are coming. Future ideological fights are coming. And maintaining flexibility has value. A lot of value. If the negotiations succeed, Rubio remains a senior member of a successful administration. He still shares in the broader victory. But if negotiations fail, he has avoided becoming the primary public defender of the effort. That's an enviable position. In politics, that's called limiting your downside. And that brings us to what may be the most important point. A lot of people are asking where Rubio has gone, but perhaps that's the wrong question. Maybe the more important question is this: why is J.D. Vance standing in the spotlight? Because political spotlights are not just opportunities. They're responsibilities. They're risks. They're places where careers can rise or where careers can take damage. If the administration ultimately achieves a durable agreement with Iran, Vance will likely receive enormous political credit. His profile will rise dramatically. He will be able to point to a major foreign policy success. But if the process falls apart, he may also absorb much of the criticism. That's the trade-off that comes with visibility. Rubio, meanwhile, remains in a different position, close enough to the project to benefit from success, far enough from the spotlight to avoid owning every failure. And from a purely political standpoint, that's a remarkably comfortable place to be. So when people say Marco Rubio has disappeared, I'm not convinced that's what's happening. Disappearing implies weakness. It implies irrelevance. It implies exclusion. What we're seeing may be something entirely different. It may be a calculated division of labor inside the administration. Or it may simply be the natural result of two political actors pursuing their own interests and arriving at the same outcome. Trump gets the public narrative he wants. Rubio avoids unnecessary political exposure. And both sides benefit. In Washington, some of the most important political moves happen under bright lights. But some of the smartest political moves happen just outside the spotlight. And right now, Marco Rubio appears to be standing exactly there. Thanks for watching.